Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to the Writer's Room. I am your host, Kat Rocha, editor-in-chief of Zero One Publishing.
You're the night editor.
And I am the night editor. And I have an echo. Let's see. And there we go. My echo is over. Anyway, I am the night editor.
Well, the night editor needs a dramatic echo.
Yes.
Like a booming voice, you know?
Yes, well, I am dramatic.
Projecting to the back of the room.
Exactly. And with me this evening is, introduce yourselves.
J.Ishiro Finney, author An Alien in a Human Suit, and I'm Not Dead.
William Hastings, author of Vagabond Legacy, Voice of a Generation.
Keep saying that. I feel it's like a neural hack, you know, where it's like if you're down, but you just keep smiling until you finally smile yourself. Mm-hmm. So you're just gonna keep saying,
if I keep saying it, I might actually become the voice of a generation.
And I'm nice to meet you, everybody. I'm Buddy Lord.
And we were going to have a very special guest this evening, but unfortunately, Eric?
Yeah, Eric Killeen.
Eric Killeen was having a couple of technical difficulties, so we will have him on very soon.
But if you would like to check his book out all the same, it is linked in the description so that when we do get him on air, you can be more familiar with his work. It's entitled One Last Echo, and I would say it's modern superhumans type tale.
I would say that too.
I can't do it justice. When we bring him on, he can give you the full rundown.
So it's One Last Echo by Eric Killeen, available now on Amazon.com. Okay, so for tonight, we will table what we were originally going to talk about, and we are going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, villains. Writing your villains or antagonists. Now, gentlemen, it has been said that your protagonist is measured against his villain or antagonist. What do you all say to that?
Wrong.
Wrong. Care to elaborate?
Well, that's fighting words. You better lay that out.
Well, I mean, you know, I think the saying is that what is it? It's something about your hero's only as good as your villain, right? Isn't that it?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, and I mean, okay, well, what is the villain? I mean, the villain can be just sort of like an ethos, or the villain can be any manner of thing, depending on your story or what it is. I also don't think it's that your hero and your villain need to be, because I think in that sense, like, people want to think that they're almost like antithetical and antithematic, you know, that my strengths are your weaknesses, and you know, like Superman and Lex Luthor, right? Is kind of, you know, oh, well, he's a fragile human, and Superman is Superman, and, you know, but, you know, I mean, even at that, like, Superman's not dumb, and Lex Luthor's, and I mean, wasn't he in one comic he was proven to be like a whatever level genius? He outsmarts one of the gods or something.
Lex?
Yeah.
Lex is one of the 3 smartest people in the DC universe. I think the only people ahead of him are Mr. Terrific and Batman.
Yeah, okay. So, but I mean, anyway, but I think that the reason why I don't like saying that is because I think people confine themselves when they do that. They want to keep themselves within almost a dueling circle of their hero, right? And I don't think that's the way villains should be looked at.
Well, I believe the reason people say that, you know, it's the whole idea that the villain is what is like what it is. The villain is what you measure your hero by. He is in the story to challenge and test your character, and your character can only prove himself as far as he's tested. And that doesn't have to be a person. It can be the environment. It can be a system. It can be a political movement, an ethos.
And yeah, and I think that's true. I mean, the basic, you know, there's like just the basics of a story, or you have a hero, the hero wants something opposes the hero's want. You know, we consider that a villain, and, you know, that opposition to the want is what creates the hero's struggle and his rise, or his or her rise. Sorry.
That's a good way of putting it. I think my personal thing that I like to do is using Spark as an example, just because it's the only book that I have that's published right now. the villain in Spark is the person that is waiting for the hero to become if he goes down a certain road. He has a similar background, he has the same sort of trauma in his past, and it's just one degree off from the protagonist. And that's supposed to that's supposed to be both frightening to the hero and inspiring, because he wants to not become this person.
So like Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader.
Very much like Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. The idea that if his life was a little bit different, he would have just become this person. And they say as much to each other. The villain of my story is very, very charismatic, and he's always trying to get people to come to his side. And one of the ways he does that is making people feel like he can relate to them. And he does that to a lot of people. That's how he has so many followers. He's very much like a cult leader.
Okay.
Yeah.
For my own stories, I think I run into this problem quite a bit, is that I tend not to have visible antagonists. And maybe you can answer that. I mean, really, Kat, as being my editor, the only stories in which I had actually had, I would say, really well-defined antagonists was Case File Arkham, because the genre required it, and it was just very much the nature of how the noir stories are told, is that the villain is very important, as well as the setting and the environment that it takes place in. Whereas most of the other stuff I write, I would say usually it's the character against, I guess, the crucible of existing in the place he's in. Be it someone who's trying to recover from a horrible injury, and working through the post-traumatic stress of what caused that injury, to someone who's been had his life chosen for him at an early age and is now trying to break out of that. But yeah, typically, I don't know why that is. I don't tend to have visible antagonists. It's usually the environment itself or the setting.
Well, because it's a little bit more interesting. I mean, it's like, what was it? Wool, right? Like Hugh Howey's book. I mean, it's just the environment. It's just the outside. It's almost not even that. It's almost like the fear of it. Because once they finally get outside and they start doing things, they find that it's not as difficult as they thought, right? But the fear of going out there in the first place was the biggest thing. You know, because they were all in this sort of like, this was like this nuclear holocaust, and they were inside this kind of silo, and then they're like, oh, go outside is death. It's certain death. And then they're like, well, this one guy's like, you know what? I'm supposed to like leave soon anyway. I'm just going to go. Because why not?
It's funny talking about visible antagonists. I've actually had it's been a very different sort of story when it comes to the second book that I'm working on. The sequel to The Crimson Spark, all the books in Vagabond Legacy have different antagonists, and the antagonist in the second book is actually very hard to for the reader to figure out who it is, because there's a lot of different forces converging on the protagonist in that. And I do a little bit of subversion. I don't usually like subversion, but in Embers, you know, there's these death cults chasing the heroes back and forth, and the person who's behind it all is not who you think it is. And that was something new. That was something I added sort of in post. It didn't used to be that way. The idea for Embers was going to be a more black and white villain compared to the first one. But that didn't wind up happening in kind of an organic way. And I actually think it turned out pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to sharing that story.
Hey, that sounds awesome, man. I have something similar in for Sins of the Fae. It's like who you think is pulling the strings, or who is set up to make you believe is pulling the strings isn't. And then when you find out who is, there's a very particular reason why they are. And it's, you know, it's that whole like, I don't know, like relatable villain or but it's, I don't know. I get tired of that trope too, where they keep, I mean, DC is especially doing it lately, where they're trying to make every villain a hero.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's
because they forgot how to write heroes.
Well,
What's that, Jay?
I have a theory about why that is, but sorry, keep going.
Oh no, I was just saying, like, I really can't stand that, but I mean, I do have something to that effect, but I think it's okay if there's a vector. You know what I mean? And what I mean by that is like if you can, track the trajectory and find and say, okay, there's a reason for this. It's not just because it's clever.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So, okay, go ahead, Jay.
Well, my thought on why we're seeing so much in comics where they're trying to make the villains the heroes is for two reasons specifically, and it's because they've wholeheartedly embraced this whole notion of postmodernism and moral relativism, and that's strictly because they're hiring a lot of these young writers either out of college or from affluenza type families in New York and Hollywood.
Yeah, and they're all studying gender studies in college, and
exactly, and
yeah,
they've been raised on this notion that there is no right, there is no wrong, it's simply power relationships. And once that happens, first off, the villains start to look far more attractive and much more relatable to the way they think. But more importantly, naturally, any hero shown would be a villain in their mind because the hero, by his very nature, is imposing a morality, making judgment calls, putting forward what is right and wrong, and doing justice.
Yeah,
And
hashtag Ben Solo was right or whatever. All he did was kill a few planets.
That's fine.
Attempt to kill his mom, kill his father.
Well, how many SJWs out there?
Those people on Alderaan had it coming. They weren't minding their own business.
Think about how many people agreed with Thanos.
Too many.
Oh God!
Oh, this is my higher cause.
That was like a big thing, right? Like
Thanos was have right. To die because, as if this fuck had any idea what was the right path out of the troubles he saw.
Isn't that like? Think about that for a moment, okay? How ignorant is that thought that you have literally omniscience? You know everything, because that's what the stone of knowledge or whatever is supposed to do, right? You know everything, and your best fucking option is to kill half the people everywhere.
Well, think about this. By his very nature with the gauntlet, Thanos can mold reality to his will. In the second film, he even flat out says he will rebuild the entire universe in his image, which means he can rebuild the universe with that dumb glove. So he says, okay, we have a resource problem. Well, I'll just kill a bunch of people. You got the fucking glove. Double the resources, you dumbass. He's not very smart.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, you could literally just change everything. I mean, you could change everybody to that they ate less. Everyone consumes 50% less. Blah.
That's kind of a relic from the comics, is Thanos not being all that smart. Like the original way that they defeat him in Infinity Gauntlet is Mephisto's really wanted to impress
intelligence.
Death.
It's
also,
pride.
wasn't he trying to impress a girl?
Yeah, if you really wanted to impress,
he was trying to impress Death.
Literally, and then everybody kicks his ass.
No, he wasn't a sword.
I'm going to kill a bunch of people to impress a girl.
No, he was just whining.
No, that was literally it. Like there was like the goddess of death, and he's like the titan of death or whatever, and he wanted her to like him, and she didn't.
Yeah,
what's funny is she has a thing for Deadpool, or is it Deadpool? Yeah, for Deadpool, and he hates Deadpool. He just because he's like, that's his squeeze, and his squeeze is like, you just don't have it. Deadpool guy. Yeah.
No, everybody was complaining about the Joker being the incel movie, but it looks like it might have been Thanos.
And the joke is that it's because Deadpool can't die, right? Like he's got an even greater healing factor than Wolverine. So she's like, oh, I almost had you that time.
And another thing that we see with that kind of thinking, with postmodernism, moral relativism, and communism, the kinds of people that found Thanos heroic, is the inability to foresee the idea that there are people out there who might be able to create more and different resources. They're always functioning on this notion of limited. Oh, well, there's limited freedom, so I should get it all for myself. And, sorry, everyone else is just going to have to suffer. Oh, there's limited stuff, It's like, who the fuck invented the stuff? It didn't exist to begin with. Somebody had to think of it. And
Okay, we're getting into all. I mean, can I just talk? I mean, I don't know. Can I digress or?
Yeah, no, digress away.
It's their shows.
Sure. I mean, my next question, honestly, was going to be going down that path.
I was getting into the psychology of Thanos, and he's a villain.
Well, what I was going to say is, I mean, look at
go into
who these idiots want to give a Nobel Prize to.
Oh,
They want to give a Nobel Prize to Greta Thunberg for screaming
How
about
dare you?
About climate. Okay.
Okay. Looping back to topic at hand, because we could get down that.
Well, no,
rabbit
but I
hole
just want to
all
make this point.
evening.
There's a kid. He's 22 or 23. Botan something. He created a company to clean the bottom of the ocean, and he's made perpetual machines that run on seawater and the electrolysis, created by the salt and everything, to be able to clean the bottom of the ocean floor. And that kid can't even get a look by the media.
Well, he's doing something proactive.
No, he's got a penis. But anyway.
Well, that too.
Okay, so going down this route, when creating this character, this antagonist that your heroes or your main characters are going to be going up against or battling, or just is going to be the opposite to your main characters, how do you approach them? Do you first approach them with the idea of, this is who my main character is going to be up against? Do you approach them with a mindset, a philosophy, or even a political bent? How do you start your creation of this character?
Well, I can answer that very quickly. As I said, I don't really have many stories with visible antagonists, and so with Case File Arkham 1 and 2, I was taking the seeds of Lovecraft characters and trying to give them purpose, give them a believable reason, make the logic they were following through make sense in some way or another. And so in one way, and I don't even try and hide this, I based my portrayal of Pikmin on Jack Nicholson at his craziest, and that his main drive is he's an artist. He wants the recognition that an artist wants. That's his main drive, and he has a real disdain for culture, just the culture around him. He wants to tear it all down. As for Her Blood Runs Cold, they were far more complex. There was the abusive father-daughter relationship, and in the one way, the father just wanted. He was an opportunist. There's nothing more to it. He was strictly an opportunist, and that was his only motivation. And he was willing to go to any length. Whereas the daughter had daddy issues, and she always wanted to eclipse the success of her father. That was really her driving force.
Can I go?
Yeah.
All right. So the villain in Crimson Spark, his name is Beljar. And we were talking about moral relativism a little.
Beljar?
Beljar, yeah.
Okay.
And his thing is basically he's a moral relativist. He's a survivor of a massacre of child soldiers, and he's sort of begun this campaign to radicalize and conquer all of the land that the story takes place in. So his basic philosophy is that people, when given freedom, hurt other people, and he has decided that they can't be trusted with it, and they have to be subjugated under him specifically. And the way he does that is he weaponizes the fear felt by people who've been abused, people who've been hurt, wounded, and he uses that as their motivator to turn them to his side. And because of that, he's very charismatic. It was a little bit of a controversial sell when I was first shopping it around, because it's a charismatic and wicked man from the Far East radicalizing people to commit acts of terrorism on a government, but
as if there's that's totally unrealistic. That's never happened.
No, not once. and he predates the creation of the Crimson Spark. He's the oldest character I have, and he's always been with me in some way or another. And I'm not sure when he first showed up, but he was the first character I ever created when I was very, very young. And even then, like, his ideas and his modes of operating, they were formed. So when I finally started writing Spark, and I needed, every great hero, which is my characters are going to be heroes someday. They're not yet. That's sort of the whole shtick. But I needed a great antagonist, and he had been with me for so long. It had to be him.
For me, creating a villain was, I don't know, it was sort of just creating the hero and finding out what I wanted to oppose them. Like, I created the story first, and I just kind of started writing, and then I'm like, oh yeah, and I do, obviously you need struggle. And I think it took me a while to get the right struggle. At first, it was just kind of a generic thing that I sort of put in there because I didn't really have the idea of what I was doing, and then it grew from there. It was sort of like, creating a radio by grabbing a single piece, a single transistor, and then building the radio around it.
Mm-hmm.
Which isn't necessarily a bad method, but it's one tool in the box, but sometimes it's a little planning beforehand can help too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't, begrudge anybody that actually has a plan. I just didn't at first. Now, once I wrote it was, I don't know, the entire like Fae series, Sins of the Fae, everything. Once I wrote the main thing, which I knew I knew I wanted it to start sort of domestic and then be able to go into a much grander scale. And once I wrote that sort of core and started wrapping around it with everything, then it became more deliberate with what I wanted.
Another thing that comes to mind is how villains can evolve as you write them. One thing that I always thought was hilarious was listening to the creators of Deep Space Nine complain about their main adversary that they'd cooked up, which was Gul Dukat. Because initially they had envisioned Gul Dukat as essentially your archetypical authoritarian, commandant of the prison camp type. You're just kind of a hard ass, very cold, very rigid. But as time went on, the actor played him so damn charismatically. And over time, I don't know if the writers realized it or not, but the so-called oppressed people, the Bajorans, kept coming off as more and more radical, more dangerous and savage. Your villain didn't look so villainous anymore. You were kind of like, well, it looks like he was more a victim of circumstance, that the situation itself drove him to what he was, which was really interesting because that was exactly what they didn't want to do with the show.
That's interesting. That kind of reminds me of going to the realm of games. There's a shooter series called Killzone, and the villains in that series are called the Hellgast, and they are designed to evoke a lot of paranoia in the audience because they have outfits that are reminiscent of Nazis. They have big red symbols that are reminiscent of Nazis. But when you read the story, you find out the whole sort of inner political workings of this world. You find out that they were banished to a planet where they couldn't survive and had to evolve into the way that's why they wear these helmets, and they're basically out for revenge at the people who did this to them. You start to realize that there's more to them specifically than you realize, and it's to the point that like I was playing that game and I felt kind of bad about shooting them. Like I didn't really feel like I was on the right side.
That's some good writing.
Yeah,
you know what? That makes me think of another game that did that incredibly effectively, which was Nier Automata. Did either of you ever play that?
Yes, I play everything Yoko Taro writes.
Was that not utterly brilliant?
He's a genius.
I mean, when you first enter that, you think the robots you're fighting are just kind of mindless automata.
and then you find them trying to like conceive children and stuff. It's incredible.
Yeah, and the crying over their dead. I mean, after a while, it just yanks your heart out. I mean, that was really well done. I thought that shows that what you can do with a game when you regard it as a story first.
Yeah, and I'm
one of trying to trigger something in the audience.
Now you guys maybe want to play it. I haven't played that.
I've had this conversation with John Delarose before. He and I are both sort of in the camp of we'll play bad games if the story is good.
Yeah,
and I have no
Nier's
regret.
A good game.
You know, Nier is a fantastic game, but I would like, you know, if a game has like terrible graphics, broken controls, if it has a really good story, I'll still play that. And a compelling antagonist is really a big selling point of particularly video game storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be that way. I don't know. For me, like that was one of the reasons at first that kind of drew me to like Final Fantasy and other games like that, was that they did have kind of an interesting story. And that was cool. Now they don't so much. They just sort of are there. And it's like, this is real, but not real. But if it were real, you'd be real. And then we're realer than real. And what? I'm lost. But, you know, they used to have pretty interesting stories and kind of tackle the issues of, you know, the universal themes, not just good versus evil, but like, you know, obviously like, you know, what is good? What is evil? You know, I mean, many times, you know, I always love it, you know, when you're the you know, the villain, right? You start off as the villain doing the horrible things, and then you realize like what you're doing is wrong for whatever reason. And then you have to set back on this different path. And I like the games that kind of, that make it hard,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because that's not easy, right? Nobody trusts you. Nobody believes in you anymore. It's hard now. And you got to figure that out. And, you know, I remember being frustrated as crap with that, you know, in the game itself, the mechanics of it. But then thinking of it in a story, you know, in story, and being like, that's just so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some of these terrible games with good stories?
Well, the first one on the top of the list, engraved in solid gold, is Deadly Premonition, or Red Seed's Profile in Japan. It's an investigative adventure game that is sort of a Japanese take on Twin Peaks.
I know what you're talking about. I never played it, but I wanted to.
It is a delight. It is so funny and interesting and completely broken on every level. Like the graphics are terrible, like the mechanics don't work, the combat is awful, but like every single bit of the story is so well thought out and creative that you just want to keep going through it.
Okay, I'm gonna need to look at it. See, I have a love of bad games too, but mine tends to be like with bad movies where it's just bad on every level, and it's so much fun for that. Like my favorite is Countdown Vampires.
Oh yeah.
Oh, but you know, a broken game with a good story, I am totally there.
And that writer Hideki Suehara, he has sort of a theme running through his games that's cult American television, but Japanized. So there are, all of his games are very, very interesting, and I highly recommend them.
Cool.
On the subject of games, there's a villain that really inspired a lot of my writing, and that's Ganondorf from The Legend of Zelda.
Oh.
The idea of a man raised in a society of all women, who is so fundamentally broken and evil that you know.
So you're saying a man growing up in a feminist society is not going to be a good man?
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. And what's worse is that he gets stuck in the cycle of reincarnation with Link and Zelda when he's not the ultimate king of evil or whatever. He's just a guy that is inhabited by that. So he is stuck unwillingly being reincarnated through centuries and centuries and centuries. And there's just this moment in I think it was Wind Waker where he recognizes Link and Link doesn't recognize him, and like the look on his face is just, he's so tired. And it was fascinating to me, and I really wound up digging into it more because of that. And a lot of Beljar's character came from that sort of idea.
From growing up in a society of single mothers?
growing up in maybe a broken society.
I have a character that she's a villain, but everybody's gonna love her, and feminists are gonna hate her.
Oh, that's nice.
And it's the
She
reason
actually likes sex.
she does, yeah. But like the whole idea is that she is a character who was born as a ghost. Like literally, she's cursed that her own tribe can never see her. And then, against all odds, she falls in love with a boy. But when the village is attacked, she goes to save him, and he can see her, but nobody else can. So they can't help each other. So she watches them die.
Mm-hmm.
And then as she watches them die, like the people who are attacking can see her fine. So they grab her and they enslave her. It happens in West Africa. And then she goes on this boat. She befriends some people. And then those people get, they start getting sick and ill. And there's a guy who's basically like, he's offering, you can take a bath and have good food and stuff. All you got to do is have sex with me. And there's one of her friends keeps taking up on it, but she gets too sick and she can't. So then she does. But then in the moment where she's going to have sex with him, like she just can't stand it. Like she's always been a hunter. She just can't stand the look in his eyes. So she kills him with a fork. And then she gets up and goes to kill a bunch of other people. And obviously, like, she kills like one, he screams, they get up, they tie her to a mast. And a spider asks her a question, do you want to live forever? And she says, yes. Because why wouldn't you? I mean, it's a dream within a dream. She doesn't know if it's real. Like, what do you say? Sure, why not? So it turns basically the spider is part of the pantheon, which is kind of the sort of arching enemies of the entire series. And it turns her into a vampire for its own purposes. She doesn't know why. And then she kills everybody on the boat. They go to Barbados and things happen. But anyways, she's lesbian. The only family, but she wants children. And the only family she can ever have are making more vampires. And then she realizes at one point, she gets enough knowledge of what happened to her and what she really is. And she realizes that all she's actually creating are more slaves. And that all of her children will be slaves. Unless someone who defies the coven or defies the brood can kill her and take the brood from her, and who is not created by the pantheon. And so she goes out to find someone to do that and she has to become his enemy and turn him into something he doesn't want to be to save what she loves.
Where's the point where lesbians or feminists won't like her?
She wanted to be a mom. Like she actually wanted to be children.
No. See, feminists, they don't put down being moms. They just put down raising them.
Yeah, they don't mind pumping the kids out when someone else takes care of them.
Okay, well, a lot of them that are seeing these are like, I hate that, they have this whole that a mom has, because she wanted to be a mom. Like she wanted to fall in love and be a mother, but she couldn't. And then I don't know, there's a bunch of other stuff happens, but I think that she'll be an interesting character because, like I said, she literally, like, one of the main protagonists. She is his worst enemy, and she is horrible to him, and does horrible things. But the reason why is because he's got to be strong enough to kill her.
I love that idea. Actually, I've read a couple stories where the trope is that the villain is deliberately trying to get the hero to kill them, and I think that it can be done really, really well.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, that leads very well into my next question. What do you do to avoid your villains being cliche? Or if you are trying to aim for a, mustache twirling haha villain, what do you do to make them not lame?
Well, I'll go first on those because I have a few thoughts. The first one, if you want to avoid cliches, right now the biggest cliche is, oh, well, they had a bad childhood, or, oh, mom didn't hug them enough, or, at this age, something just scarred them for life. And if only that thing hadn't happened. And that goes back to the moral relativism, or, oh, they're doing it for money. And that was something I ran into when I was dealing with the Hollywood types, is they could not possibly imagine that some people are just fucking evil.
Mm.
And it's a very first world point of view that evil doesn't exist. But
I'm sorry. I just North Korea doing this for water rights from
exactly.
the Himalayas.
Yeah.
It's like, have you looked at a map?
Yeah. Oh, they're just doing it to save their people. It's like, no. Look, Hitler didn't do it because mommy didn't hug him enough, or that he wasn't successful, or that he wanted money. It didn't have to do with any of those things. And more to the point, I really despise the notion of nobody's truly evil. People think they're doing the right thing always. No, that is absolutely not true. I've said it before. I'll say it again. There are men right now in Liberia who lead child armies, who go into towns and will rape boys in front of their mothers and then say, either you shoot her and eat her, or I will kill all of you. And
okay, well, that escalated quickly.
Yes. And what he means by I'll kill all of you is by wrapping them in barbed wire, dousing them with gasoline, and setting them all on fire.
Ouch.
Now, you can't possibly tell me that guy thinks, well, what I'm doing deep down is the right thing.
Or mommy didn't hug him enough.
Yeah. That's one hell of a lack of hugs, isn't it?
I mean, you're talking to a guy with a side D in clinical psychology.
Well, and another reason why I brought it up,
I mean, one of the things that I would say is it's sort of like that's what, people were talking to me about the Joker, and I actually saw it was a Danica, Comic Girl 19 or whatever. She's got a very popular person, was coming at a couple of feminists because the feminists were talking about, is it Chuck Palahniuk that wrote, was it Fight Club?
No, that was Palahniuk.
Yeah, as I said, Chuck Palahniuk. Yeah. But they were coming at him they were coming at Fight Club and Joker and they were saying, oh, these are just like male rage movies. And I'm like, and she's like, that's the weakest take ever. You should realize that society has failed young men. And, that, I mean, and Chuck Palahniuk, like, I mean, I actually, I haven't talked to him, but I've seen a lot of things that he said about it. And what I can get from it is, I mean, that was more about the kind of degrading male preservation caused by like latchkey parents, by like the father not being there.
We're the result of the first generation of boys raised by single mothers.
Exactly. And the kid had nothing to stand by in that. And so when he got older and that was missing and he had to present it in some way, you know what I mean? And in that way, they're very similar because, they say that was, that had to come out somewhere, right? Like if you keep that down for so long, I mean, it's unpent. It's gotta, spew forth, and it spewed forth in just violent clubs fighting and bleeding and being broken in the midst of these, parking lots or wherever it was, right? Just proving themselves because they had to, because that's what men are supposed to do. And they never had done it before. And in the same sense, Joker, like a lot of people, I think, take it kind of incorrectly. Like Joker is, what you have to understand is that the way that your psyche is built, okay, is if you have a shaky foundation at the beginning, you go all kind of different ways because your mind, think of it like as you're walking, you're walking like this path, okay, and then people put obstacles in the path. But no matter what, you have to keep walking. That's all you have to do. You have to keep walking. So what do? You find another way to get around. You jump over it. You go around it. You do whatever. Well, that's what your brain does when you get trauma. Okay? You get trauma. Your brain builds like a protection around it, and you find a way over it, through it, around it. You're like a Navy diver. Okay, you don't want to retrieve it. You're going to move it. You're going to go around it. You're going to do all kinds of things. And what that ends up causing is coping and defensive mechanisms that do all different kinds of things to your mental pathology. And so in this case, like, I think that he was an actual, he would be a sadist, right? Like he loved inflicting pain on others and he had no empathy. Okay, he had empathy for others, but not for himself, which was interesting. Everybody says, oh, he's a narcissist. He doesn't fit a narcissist profile, actually. And what he does fit is, like I said, he was a sadist, and he was unable. The only thing he found joy in was hurting other people. But he was somebody who was taught all his life that the best thing that you can do is share, like your pleasure, share a smile or a laugh. But the only thing he found laughter or smile or smiling and joy was hurting other people. So that was contained in him for his entire life, and then he would just laugh uncontrollably. And there's actually like a lot of social psychology now that says that laughter is that we actually laugh when we don't know what to do with our emotions.
That's true. That can definitely happen. Nervous laughter.
And so go ahead.
Oh no, sorry.
Sorry.
If you, don't want to cut you off. You finish what you were saying.
No, go ahead, dude.
Okay.
Come on.
Yeah. All right.
What the hell?
Finney was talking about moral relativism again and the tragic backstory trope, and I came at that for Spark, trying to do something a little bit different. Spark is a story about abuse. All the characters have been abused in some way or another, but they don't do what Beljar did. So that's sort of the clear deviance right away, is that it's obviously not that bad things happen to Beljar, because all the other characters have had something bad happen to them. Instead, and there's this very famous quote, I forget who by, because I'm not very professional. It says that trauma can build up around a person to the point that they are nothing. It overrides basically their own free will, and all they are is evil. And I thought that was really interesting, that enough trauma can just make you into an evil person. And Beljar is an evil person. You know, he gives you excuses and just.
Well, I think it becomes, that's what I was kind of saying, is that like when that becomes your pathology, that's all you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's your toolbox. That's how you know to deal with society and life. Okay. And so it's like, all right, well, is that good? Is that bad? It honestly just is.
Yeah, and he does think that he's doing the right thing, but when you take a step back and you look at what he is doing, all he's doing is traumatizing others.
Mm-hmm.
So the cycle of trauma is prevalent even in silly fantasy stories. One of the ways I got Beljar to avoid being a cliched villain is I gave him 2 lieutenants, one of which is a cliched villain.
So you gave him Starscream and
Yeah, basically I did. I gave him like a literal mustache twirling evil son of a bitch who just sort of hangs around like Grima Wormtongue, just hangs off of him like he's the one that does most of the evil monologuing and all this stuff, and he was a lot of fun to write. I like that character a lot.
And looping that back to topic, and Buddy, I'd like to return to you as well on this. So how did you write that character so that he's not cliche then?
The accomplice?
Yeah.
He is cliche. That's sort of how I wrote him. I wrote him as a literal.
I think you started saying like he's sort of like an outer foil.
Yeah,
to the villain.
He is. He's the most objectively evil character in the whole story, first of all, and a lot of that comes from his joy in it. Like, he loves being evil. Kind of, and you know, there aren't a lot of characters that are like that. The only one I can really think of off the top of my head is like Dio from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. But you know, there is something to be said for like a pure evil antagonist that is just the worst. And that isn't my main antagonist, but he's there and he's present, and he adds this theatrical nature to Beljar's crew that I think is just you can't do the story without it.
And there is a share of people in the world who really do get a thrill out of breaking taboos, doing horrible things to children or killing people.
Mm.
And it's not even necessarily the act itself, but that it's taboo. It's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there's all different kinds of, like, there is a lot of deviant pathology out there. You know, that's why there's 5 different manuals for diagnostics for that kind of thing.
So
but
you asked your question about avoiding cliches, and what was the other?
Or if you do have a outright villainous villain, how do you make it so that how do you put a new take on it, or a new spin, or basically make it so that the character has more to him than just being mustache twirly. So he's not the bad type of cliche.
I would make him likable as all hell.
Yeah, I was about to say exactly. What you want to do is endear him to the audience.
Yeah, and the way I did that with this the lieutenant character for Beljar's lieutenant is I made him funny, and I made him energetic, happy about everything that he does, enthusiastic. He sings all the time, and he takes this great pleasure in it. But he's also very, very loyal to Beljar, to the point that people are kind of like wondering why. You know, why would this person who's basically chaos incarnate be serving somebody who has more clearly defined goals?
Actually, William, I'm going to step in. I'm going to add something that maybe you don't see because you're the writer. What I liked about that character was from the onset, you knew you couldn't trust him, but you also didn't know which way that you, the writer, was going to take him. So when it did turn out that he was villainous, through and through, no, it wasn't a shock, but at the same time, it added yet another dimension to the character.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it, I think.
You know, because our protagonist had to trust him at the beginning.
Yeah. He isn't originally. He doesn't show up as a villain. He shows up as an ally, but he is so obviously evil and untrustworthy that I had to kind of run with it, because his design and the way he's written, like, nobody would ever think that he wasn't going to turn. But when he does, you got to make it interesting, and I think I pulled it off okay.
Well, we've all dealt with middle managers who really were like that.
Well, I mean, I was the bad way to do that would be like the latest Star Wars.
Which one?
Rise of the Skulkwalker, where the villain that nobody was fooled by, I call him, General Huxtable.
Oh yeah, General Hux, yeah.
It was, and the pudding bob. Everybody's got a room for the pudding bob.
My wife Camille said that we're going to destroy the resistance.
I call him General Huxtable. When he went rogue, no one was surprised.
No, not at all. I remember in Last Jedi when he finds Ren unconscious, he visibly reaches for his gun. I was like, oh my god.
Okay, so we're coming up very close to the last 10 to 15 minutes of the show. Does the audience have any questions for us? Well, I mean, we'll just keep talking. It's going to take a little.
Okay. We were like, okay.
In rapt silence.
I have a question for you. Since you all are writers and you're constantly honing your craft, has there ever been a villain in a story, movie, TV show, video game that you thought was a lost opportunity, and what would you have done to improve them?
Oh, that's kind of a Jeopardy question, isn't it?
I gotta just one. Hold on. There's a lot, actually, for me.
Well, since we only have 10 minutes, roughly pick the...
Okay, I'll toss out my pick just off the top of my head. I'm sure if I really dug through my memory, I'd probably come up with something better. But outright, Pinhead, the Hell Priest from Hellraiser. In those first two films, he comes across as someone who's governed by rules. Now, those rules are downright evil, but he himself is a neutral party. He's an arbiter of that will of someone else. Mm-hmm. And as the films went on, they just turned him into the most archetypical, I like killing people character. Lost opportunity.
That's a good one. Yeah, they definitely did really run them to the ground.
I got one. Wonder Woman. Ares.
Oh, okay. That's a good one.
I hated that they went the cheap way and they made Ares the big bad villain to be destroyed. I thought it would have been so much cooler if she would have killed Ares and nothing happened, because it's not some god that's manipulating everything. It's just the will of man.
That's good.
Let me hold on. I'm almost there. I just
Okay, another one. The Daleks. The Daleks were an awesome villain for decades.
We've been watching the lost episodes from the Troughton era, and oh my fucking god, the power of the Daleks was just jaw-droppingly good.
You know, if anytime they show up, there's going to be a body count. They're hard to destroy. They're clever. They're very methodical about what they do, and most importantly, you know, when they were showing up, there were going to be losses, and it was not going to be easy. That's completely gone. That is completely gone.
They're scared. When the fuck are Daleks ever scared of anything?
They're not supposed to know fear.
Yeah.
They're single-minded.
They're single-minded. Either they're pissed off or they're homicidal. There is no in between. Oh, and they're calculating. I will give you they're calculating.
And the episode when they tried to turn have a new breed of Dalek that were like jihadists.
Yeah.
And then they just killed them off immediately. There's a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
Got a little too real, didn't it, guys?
Oh, I've got mine.
Okay.
Yeah. Count Dooku.
Yes, I agree. I agree completely.
I think that Count Dooku's motivation in like losing his apprentice Qui-Gon and turning against the Republic, abandoning his master Yoda, I think that that's all very interesting, and it raises the questions of would Qui-Gon have joined with him as well, and it really is interesting. And then they cut his head off 5 minutes into the Revenge of the Sith, and nobody ever finds out anything.
And you're right, because I go by the idea that Qui-Gon was a shitty Jedi, but if you look at it, the idea that he's got that inner conflict all the way, that totally makes sense. And yeah, that was a lost opportunity that would have gone for major amounts of development that went absolutely nowhere.
I haven't seen the TV show, so there may be some of that in there, but. That would definitely be mine. I have a whole. I could write a book about like the philosophy.
I was thinking about one was it's not a movie, but the game Dragon Age 2.
That entire game's a lost opportunity.
Is that the bad one?
It is,
Okay.
but like especially the Templar commander at the end, that they made her changed by the crystal sword she wielded and not just given her the agency to change on her own. I thought that cheapened the entire notion that she just, oh no, she's just crazy. She's drugged. Like, why?
You know what? Now that you mention it, in Mass Effect, the first Mass Effect, they do something similar with Soren. You can talk Soren down.
BioWare had a penchant for doing that after a while. They just started going these kind of cheap ways when it would have been better to just, to study the complexities of human nature and deviant pathology is much more interesting, right? A human falling to their own hubris, to their own pain, to their own whatever is much more interesting to me than saying they were drugged.
Yes, exactly. And at the end of Mass Effect, you can talk this guy down, and it's this very dramatic, incredible scene. And then he gets possessed and is the final boss anyway. Either way, the final boss is always the same. And I just thought that was.
There's a moment just like that actually, where there's this one guy that's going to blow up the tower, and you talk to him. You can have a talk with him, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm ready to do it," and it won't let you talk him out of it. Like everything else, you can talk, but you can't talk about that. It's like that's dumb. Like, just give me, like, I know, I don't know. Obviously, like, programming and you got to get the game out and all that stuff. But it's just such a wasted opportunity.
We could do a whole stream about wasted BioWare opportunities.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions.
Okay, so I
good guys.
I want to say one thing real quick.
Yes.
I want to see what Ish has to say about this. I think he did mention it on Twitter, but I just want to bring this up because we were talking about Cthulhu and H.P. Lovecraft and everything.
Uh-oh.
And what is your opinion about a company that stands on the shoulders of a giant and then takes a giant shit on the giant's head?
Well, I would say that they're a giant shit. It's that simple. It's obvious that they like this stuff, that they want to indulge in it, but yet at the same time, they can't rationalize it with their moronically limited thinking. That their stupid ideology has backed them into a corner where they can't look at people in the past and say, well, that was then and they were kind of broken. Or feel
Exactly.
empathy for a guy who was very damaged, had a very rough upbringing, that had turned him into a man who was essentially a shut-in, who was afraid of fucking everything. That's what people don't realize about Lovecraft. It wasn't that he just hated one or two races or something like that. He was afraid of just about everything.
Well, he also, I mean, it was very, I don't know, it seems like, I mean, there's a lot of obvious change that basically he just took things in the Bible and flipped them around. You know, I mean, like Drogon himself it's the dragon described in the Bible.
Well, what he would do is that he would come up with these really warped idea of elder gods beyond our understanding, who were really alien beings or extra dimensional beings, or things that existed out of time and space. And then he'd go through and say, well, what if this is what humans interpreted them to be? And so then he'd have religious overtones. Like, you know, it turns out that there was a certain race of aliens that the Celts had thought were the evil, more vile version of fairies. Dagon is mentioned in the Bible, but it's nothing like the one in the Bible. And it was, again, the idea that the Sumerians had misunderstood what they were dealing with.
Okay.
Yeah,
and that's understandable. That's very creative. You know what I mean? And to take that impetus and then turn that around into a kind of temporal or transient, like socially responsible look as of today is just the most ridiculous thing. And then to belittle the man and his legacy, but use it to make money. You pathetic fucks.
I've always been a really big fan of Rudyard Kipling, so I'm used to these woke companies trying to take a man's IP and profit off of it while shitting all over his legacy.
That's for sure.
It never gets any less horrible to watch, and it just makes me feel like, you know, public.
It's just so ridiculous because, like, look, if you had the creative ability to do it on your own, then you do it on your own, and you wouldn't need the man's name. But and that's the thing. I think that's the worst part about it for me, is that you're going to sit there and preach about how somebody's horrible, but then the only reason anybody gives a shit about what you're doing is because you're using that man's name.
Exactly.
And
these are people who, if you'll forgive hyperbole, you know, saw the face of God. These are people who wrote books that will never be forgotten.
Right.
And you're bouncing off of them to create your own little woke take on it while shitting all over their legacy. But who's going to be remembered in, you know, is it going to be?
I mean, look at it. I mean, you know,
woke people will be remembered.
Everybody, I mean, Gaiman writes stories, short stories that are his version, his like sort of succession of H.P. Lovecraft. And he says, I can't write H.P. Lovecraft. I'm not as, you know, I don't have the ability to do that. But I can, you know, write what in my, he says, I can write what I feel from after I read those books. You know what I mean?
One of my favorite books of all time. In my opinion, one of the best books of all time, Stephen King's It, is incredibly heavily Lovecraft inspired. And King will be the first one to admit that.
Yeah, extra dimensional creature, you know, causing all kinds of mess. They can't think of it. The dreams, everything. I mean, yeah, very, 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 you know, closely related. You can definitely see the tendrils there. But and that's the thing is, it's like, you know, if you're going to use the nostalgia, it's a double-edged sword. Okay, because it's gonna, you know, you get the fame. Guess what? You get the ire if you treat it with disrespect.
Well, I'm going to go a step further and say that Lovecraft is more than just an idea or a property. It is a modern mythology. It was the first real introduction to an atheist's universe in horror, and it's transcended the decades for a reason. And part of it is that it's open source, that other people could write in that universe and tell their own tales. Now, we do have a question from one of the listeners, and
actually we have a few.
It's a little baffling. We'll ask it.
Okay. How would you make an air-fried chicken pirate be absolutely vicious?
Now, is this
the vicious universal?
Now, is this a chicken that's been air fried? So he's a cooked chicken who is now a pirate?
No. I think it's a pirate that steals fried chicken in the air.
Ah,
air fried chicken.
Pirate.
Oh, and
you're right.
Okay, so this is a confusing question. We need commas or something.
Golden nuggets.
It's because what I'm seeing is some sort of personified like vector fried chicken in the middle of the airport. Like
There's a different question that might be a little bit easier.
What? Where do babies come from?
Yeah, well, no, not that one. Butts is the answer.
when you have a zygote and
Well, BGC, I know, he's like, wait, I'm typing. And he writes, how can one or I go about rendering a protagonist who is a genuine piece of shit, a sadist, narcissist, sociopath, but convincingly metamorphose them into a repentant hero?
Oh, I don't know.
dear God.
I actually
Orange. Then also realize the other thing. Often the most likable people are evil sons of bitches, and often the most moral people, good people, aren't necessarily very nice.
Kat,
Yes.
do you want to maybe talk a little bit about your impressions of Nea? Because this seems kind of like the journey she went on.
Oh, of Nea? Sure. In William's book, his character Nia. I don't want to give away a bunch, though. I'm afraid I'm going to give away stuff.
That's okay. She is a girl that dresses as a boy, and she is cruel, violent, narcissistic, selfish, and generally kind of a sociopath for a large chunk of the story. But by the end,
I think if not my very first comment to you, one of the very first was, is she supposed to be a sociopath?
I remember that one.
I was expecting you to say no, and when you said yes, I'm like, oh, I can work with this.
Yeah, no, and she is a very awful person, but she goes about a healing process through the story, and by the end, she is a lot more human and kind. And I think that was one of my favorite things to write, actually.
I mean, I think it would just be when any kind of deviant pathology. I mean, I say deviant when I mean deviant, I don't mean like devious or sinister. Okay, when we say deviant pathology, what we're actually talking about is just different from normative pathology. And so, liking to inflict pain on other people, centering too much of your social energy on yourself, and having no empathy for yourself or others is deviant in its pathology. And in order for someone to write that in a way that people would, I think, relate to it, you've got to have them break. They need to break and then be rebuilt.
Yes, and she goes through moments where she realizes that, like, what the hell is wrong with me? I'm a monster.
And I think, and see, that's interesting. I mean, like, there's a couple. Has everything, like, the Avatar series, Korra, the last Avatar or whatever? I thought they did that. They got into it, but they did it badly because they, what I mean. Obviously, it was a series, and so it's difficult. But they, she just like goes and she's like, oh, I just have this little bit of something in my body, and I got to get it out. And then she had to pull it out, and then she was great. That's not how this works. I mean, it's to do it realistically, like somebody breaks, you want to build them back up, piece by piece, brick by brick. And when they are when they're reformed, they're pretty much somebody different. They're somebody new.
Well, also think about the amount of courage and strength it takes for an individual, once they actually see that horrible reflection and realize, oh my God, I'm a piece of shit, having the bravery to admit it and change. And
not only that, I mean, all your behaviors, all your habits, everything that you've developed up until then has been predicated on that specific pathology. To recreate yourself step by step, granular inch by inch, would be one of the most excruciating experiences you could ever imagine, because everything you do, you will have to question it. And it will be counterintuitive to everything you've ever learned.
Okay, are there any more
Wow.
questions?
And that's I think that's a great way to put it.
Totally.
That's why you guys have me.
Unless there are any more questions, I think that is a wonderful way to end the evening.
I'm still pondering that air-fried chicken pirate.
I don't know what that is.
Coming to Indiegogo in May.
It's a saber-tooth air fried chicken. You know?
Maybe we'll hold off on the chicken and bring it up at a later episode. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. So, Buddy, William, please tell the world where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at TheBuddyLord. You can also find me at BladeKnight.com. Please sign up for my books, Sway and Sins of the Fae, coming to a store near you, at least if your store is Indiegogo, on March 13th.
And you can get the Crimson Spark on Amazon. I'm posting the link in the chat right now. It's a little confusing. My YouTube is Hastings. It's not actually Hastings, but you'll see it. You'll see it in there. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Mr. Will Hastings. And if you want to win a free copy of the Crimson Spark, I'm doing a raffle. That's my pinned tweet. So check that out.
And J.Ishiro Finney, author An Alien in a Human Suit. You can get my books, Case File Arkham 1 and 2, Utopiates, World War Kaiju, and the audio drama Titanium Rain, all on Amazon. And if you buy it there, please leave a review. And if you get it from my publisher, 01publishing.com, I will sign it.
And I have been your host, Kat Rocha, the Night Editor. You can find me at nighteditor.com. And thank you all very much.
And I hope that next week or the week after that, we can bring Eric Killeen on and he can tell us about his novel.
Definitely.
You can check out the details in the show notes.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. If you would like to support the channel, you can go to our Subscribe Star. Link is in my website at nighteditor.com. Thank you all very much.
And now go watch The Guyver, I guess.
Good night,
Now
everybody.
it's time to say